Welcome back to WD.
FM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. We're your hosts, Brie Bertolacini, Content and Research Manager.
And Chris Mullen, Marketing and Editorial Specialist at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
So today on this episode of our WDFM Collections Clash, we are starting a bit of a tradition and repeating the topic of love. So if you're new here, our Collections Clash is where Chris and I pick 3 objects relating to the theme, this month being love. And these objects can be found in the Walt Disney Family Museum galleries. We will then clash against each other's selections, and you, the listener, will get a chance to vote on your favorite in our Instagram stories.
Before we get started on this collections clash, let's take a look at our last clash. The topic was Winter in the Galleries. I took the win in the first round between my pick of Walt's skis, as it should, and a Bree's pick of the 1960 Winter Olympic pins.
I can't argue with that. The skis are superior, and the listeners voted as well. They are in full agreement. I love that. Well, for the second round, I took the win with my selection of the layout drawing from the short On Ice against Chris's pick of the comics cover of Mickey and Donald in a winter scene on a sled. That was definitely a tough pick that round. It was kind of like, very, very similar iconography there.
Both very icy, both good choices indeed. And for the final round, taking the first win of the year, Bree won the round with her pick of Walt and Lillian's family home footage of them ice skating. That was against my selection of the winter painting, Davy Crockett's Cabin by Disney legend Peter Ellenshaw. Congrats, Bree.
Thank you. But I will acknowledge that I did have a little bit of an unfair advantage in that last round. Since I edit these episodes, I did put the ice skating footage in the voting slide and in the video podcast. And it's just really hard to vote against Walt having so much fun ice skating. So I'll just acknowledge that up front.
Well, all's fair in love and Winter in the Galleries. And speaking of love being this month's topic, since you won, you get to have the first selection for this month's topic of love.
Now, last year, I highlighted the people that Walt loved the most, represented by objects in our galleries. This year, I'm looking at objects that represent Walt's love for his hobbies. So for my first pick, I'm going with the Carolwood Pacific Railroad caboose. Now, the Lily Bell engine is a great object to highlight Walt's love for his wife Lillian, who it was named after, but the caboose is a special object because it highlights his love for steam locomotives and miniatures. So the caboose was the only train car that Walt worked on entirely by himself and furnished the interior entirely to scale. So he shared in Railroad magazine in 1965, quote, "My special pride was the caboose, which I furnished entirely in miniature, right down to the pot-bellied stove." Now you can see those pot-bellied stoves. We have 3 of them on display in our miniature gallery. A little bit about the caboose. It was based on the design of an 1800s Colorado and Southern original narrow gauge caboose number 1002. That was a mouthful. And that was commonly called a bobber caboose. So luckily it had an easier name than that. The top of the caboose has hinges so that when it was installed at Walt's Carolwood property, he would be able to open up and show friends and family what was inside and the hard work that he put into it. Now, the way the Lily Bell train is on view in our galleries, you aren't able to see the interior of the train, but there are great photos on the text panels that you can look at. So when you open the caboose, the interior was painted a seafoam green. Inside, there's a fully functional pot-bellied stove, a copper wash basin, heater, oil marker lamps, and doors with fully functioning brass hardware. So you can really see the love and care that Walt put into this caboose.
Good pick, Bree. Covering Walt's love for his hobbies and his love for his wife. I am going to go with the more conventional example of Walt's love for his wife. An old favorite on this podcast, Walt's bronzed hat, which you can see close to the end in our galleries. Here's an excerpt from a blog on our website about the bronzed hat. Quote, "Often at the center of the laughter and fun was one of Walt's beloved hats. Worn at a jaunty, rakish angle, this ever-present fixture became the frequent muse for exchanges between Lily and Walt. When asked to fix his hat, Walt would often respond with an exaggerated crush of the hat on his head. Lily would occasionally abscond with his hat, sailing it far out of reach before Walt could rescue it from her clutches. A tale fondly recounted is of Lily offering Walt's hat as an accolade following a bullfight, flinging it into the ring. It was one of Walt's favorites, and he narrowly rescued it before it was lost to tradition and a dusty demise. Their love and laughter withstood the test of time. Celebrating this was another one of Walt's hats, the hat bronzed with love. In a gift presented to Lily on her birthday in 1941, she found a cascade of orchids pouring over their vase. In removing the flowers, their container was revealed to be Walt's favorite hat with the crown shaped into a heart and preserved in bronze. So just when you talk about love in the galleries, that's the first thing that comes to mind. It's such a great, sweet story about Walt the person and Walt the lover.
Yes, I am a huge fan of the bronzed hat. And to kind of like peel back the layers a little bit, we have some updated lore that I think this is the first time, Chris, that you've presented. I know that last year we talked about the bronze hat, and and on the blog and other places you might find that this is such a small detail that only like few people care, but I really care about this. Diane had recalled that the hat was originally filled with violets. And we found this article that Lillian had written in McCall's magazine. In the article, I Live with a Genius. And she recalled the story, and everything was, lining up exactly how Diane had told it. But the only differing detail was that Lillian said that there were actually brown orchids in the hat, which does make sense. If you look at brown orchids, they don't sound great, but they're really a beautiful color, and they would go perfectly with this bronzed hat. So I think I've heard violets were one of Lillian's favorite flowers, so it makes sense that Diane would recall violets. But in our Walt Disney Treasures book, we do put in there that it's the orchids. We're always learning more about these objects, so just something fun. Now, for my second pick, I'm going with the photo strips of Walt and Lillian we have on display in our galleries. These two strips are one of my favorite series of photos of Walt and Lillian. Here you see two people just deeply in love and expressing their playful side, vamping for the camera in various poses. Diane Disney Miller remembered, quote, "Mother and Dad were somewhere. I forget. I think it might have been New Orleans. I received a long hotel envelope in the mail from them with no note, just these photo booth shots, which I love," end quote. Now, Lillian shared in the 1953 article, I Live with a Genius, from McCall's magazine about her marriage to Walt, quote, "I wouldn't have missed 1 minute of the 27 years I've been married to Walt Disney. I'm proud of my husband and what he has done, but I'm even prouder that along the way, in bad times and good, he's never lost his sense of humor or his zest of life." So I just think these photos are just a great example of Walt's zest for life and love for his wife. That rhymed.
Well, Walt's zest for life, very much represented in all of these stories. But for my second pick, I'm going to go away from the big man, and I'm going to go with the It's a Small World couple in the World's Fair section of the galleries. On one level, this is a pretty straightforward depiction of love, two kids holding hands. But on another level, these characters were sketched by Mark Davis, and his wife Alice Davis designed and fabricated the costumes for the audio animatronic characters. Talk about a love story within a love story. I wrote about Mark and Alice's love story several years back on our blog. Here's an excerpt from the Small World section. Quote, "Alice leapt at the chance to work with a favorite artist of hers from her youth, Mary Blair, celebrating the children and cultures of the world on a project that would combine all three of their strengths: Mark's humor, Mary Blair's whimsical and vibrant styling, and Alice's pattern and fabric expertise," end quote. So they were such a power couple that, of course, their Main Street windows are right next to each other. And I think that's just the perfect kind of representation of their love that we have in the galleries.
That's such a great pick. I love talking about Alice and Mark Davis. And this is the second time you've referenced grabbing some information on our blog and that you write for the blog as well. You do have a new piece. I know you won't toot your own horn, but a great article on the band concert, the 90th anniversary. So much great content on our blog. So definitely want to check that out.
Yes, Seeing Mickey's True Colors, the band concert at 90 at waltdisney.org/blog. It'll be the first link that pops up. Come read it. It was a good time writing it, and I hope it'll be as good of a time reading it. Thanks for the plug, Brie.
Oh, of course, anytime. For my last pick, I'm going for something small and dear to Walt Disney's heart, his miniature collection. Now, Walt housed his miniatures in a room just outside his office at the Burbank Studios. Today, his miniature collection is housed at the Walt Disney Family Museum and ranges from objects he collected to objects he created himself. Much like the caboose that we were talking about earlier, I have miniatures on the brain. Now, Walt wrote, quote, "My hobby is a lifesaver. When I work with these small objects, I become so absorbed that the cares of the studio fade away, at least for a time, end quote. Walt began seriously collecting miniatures during his European travels in the 1950s, bringing home countless tiny objects of glass, wood, china, and metal. He collected delicate Limoges and Haviland tea services, Toby jugs, Wedgwood pitchers, Bennington crocks and jars, sparkling wine and perfume bottles, drinking glasses and tableware, and even a delicate candelabra. In our miniature dioramas we have on display in our galleries, Walt has a miniature portrait of himself in his youth and even a miniaturized portrait of his parents, which I always love that he took the time to scale down and perfect scale some of these wonderful and meaningful photos to him. His love for miniatures manifested in the Storybook Land Canal Boats attraction, originally known as the Canal Boats of the World at Disneyland. Imagineer Ken Anderson, who designed the Storybook Land attraction, said he discovered it was, quote, one of Walt's favorite rides. He made frequent visits to the model shop at the Burbank Studios to provide comments and his expertise on the miniature models, end quote.
Well, Bree, if there's a truism on Collections Clash, it's that if there's ever an opportunity for me to select Walt's skis, I will do that. And if there's ever a chance to pick a miniature, then that's absolutely your arena, your wheelhouse. So glad to see you continuing that tradition as well. Now, my pick is fittingly also a very small set of items. Flora and Jessie Call's wedding buttons on display in our first gallery. The museum would not be here. Disneyland would not exist. Mickey Mouse, you get the picture, without Flora Call marrying Elias Disney and the rest being history. Now, Bree, interesting question for you and for our listeners. If they got married today, what do you think their wedding hashtag would have been? I came up with a couple because that's my job. What about hashtag last call for Disney or hashtag Elias made a call? I don't know. I think there's something there. Now, if you're seeing this clip on a social media platform, comment what you think a good wedding hashtag for Elias and Flora would be. I feel like we'd get some good answers there.
Yeah, I love Last Call for Disney. That one really made me giggle. Well, it is now time for our honorable mentions. These will not be up for voting. So for my first pick, I wanted to highlight Walt's brotherly love for his brother Roy. So I'm going with the photo we have on display of Roy in his Navy uniform and Walt proudly beside him. And another photo you can tell was taken, but in the same photo shoot, Walt is actually wearing Roy's uniform. So Walt's older brothers joined the military. Herbert and Raymond enlisted in the Army and Roy in the Navy. During one of Roy's visits from Chicago from his Great Lakes posting, Walt met him at the train station and remarked later that his brother, quote, looked swell in a sailor's uniform. Roy's letters were full of, quote, blowing bugles and patriotism. So Walt remembered, quote, I just had to get in there. So he caught the bug from his brother. Walt became determined to serve in some way, and we know he eventually served in the American Red Cross. Walt recalled, quote, Roy had faith in me. I think that Roy has done a lot of things against his better judgment because he felt that I wanted to do it. Most of our arguments and disagreements have been because Roy has felt that he had to protect me, end quote. So just a great example of just two brothers that really loved each other and had great respect and admiration for one another that carried them through their entire lives, so much so joining their creative forces and creating the Disney Brothers cartoon studio. I love that it was the Disney Brothers that really started it all.
Well, and the story of Roy and the Sea seems like a story that could be delved into a little deeper. I mean, Donald Duck wearing a sailor suit could tie into Roy being a Navy man. And of course, interests in sailing continued on with Roy's children. So, I feel like there's some threads about Roy O and his experience on the seas may have had some ripple effects, if I can make a reference there, to Disney history at whole. So definitely feel like there's an avenue to explore there. Now, my first honorable mention is another favorite studio romance of mine that's depicted in the galleries. Well, before you get to Mark and Alice Davis, you get to see Ward and just a few steps away, Betty Kimball. We have Ward and Betty both in interview format in the galleries, just steps away from each other, which I think is very sweet. Ward in the Snow White gallery talking about how his soup sequence was cut after 8 months of work, leading to his creation of the iconic Jiminy Cricket. And Betty in the next gallery, just right through the doorway, talking about the advancements of the new Burbank studio lot that was built in 1940. I wish I could be as enthused about anything these days as Betty was recalling the installation of air conditioning.
I always love those clips, and I particularly really enjoy Ward's his soup sequence interview. It's so fun.
Yeah, his shirt is so loud. His shirt is really doing the talking in that interview.
Yeah, definitely. He was a very, very loud personality, so it definitely tracks. Now, for my next honorable mention, I'm going with the automaton animals to represent Walt's love for innovation. Now, these ordinary, kind of unassuming toys are evidence of Walt's appreciation of animation in all of its forms. So, in the summer of 1949, Walt took his wife Lillian and daughters Diane and Sharon on vacation to Europe. One afternoon in Paris, Walt ventured out on his own and did some shopping. He returned to the hotel room with 2 large bags filled with a variety of wind-up toys. Diane remembered that moment, saying, quote, "He unpacked them, wound them all up, and studied them as we looked on, amused but puzzled. Not terribly unique, but possibly the forerunners of audio animatronic figures," end quote. Walt saw something in these toys. Walt observed, quote, "It's amazing that you can get such interesting movement from a very simple mechanism." So I love looking at these because while they just look like little toys on a shelf in our galleries, they really represent this like forerunners of audio animatronics and how that technology just started in very simple forms and how we see it today and how incredible that technology has evolved.
And it's also such a perfect example of Walt's very natural curiosity. You know, someone with Walt's background, you could see just being all about drawing characters, animation, illustration, painting, etc., having his own little hobbies here and there. But he really saw all of these, more three-dimensional interests of his, like trains, miniatures, and these automaton figures as not just things that could occupy his time, but also things that could have real applications in his work, not just as a filmmaker. Of course, we would see some applications in filmmaking. Audio animatronics would get into the films a little bit, but mostly that it would kind of coalesce in this bigger themed entertainment enterprise, the Disney parks. So it's a cool example of just how, Walt was interested in a lot of things, and it didn't just stop at him being a filmmaker. He found ways to use his curiosity to really find other more three-dimensional applications that would pay dividends for years and generations to come.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that's such a through line through Walt's entire life. You find these stories of Walt's hobbies and him feeling like he needed to find ways that if he was interested in them, to make other people interested in them. And so, like I was just talking about the miniatures, he loved miniatures. And so he created an attraction at Disneyland as an appreciation to miniatures. So there's all these kind of fun little stories just depicting that, which I love.
Absolutely. Well, and returning to the world of animation, for my second honorable mention, I'm picking a Mickey and Minnie example, but not the usual one. I know a go to for us is always that earliest known drawing of Mickey and Minnie Mouse, which fits so many great potential collections clash topics. But I'd also like to highlight a couple of sketches that are just beyond the earliest known drawings of Mickey and Minnie Mouse. We have a couple of sketches on display from Plain Crazy, which was the first produced but third widely released Mickey Mouse short film. While the earliest known drawings of Mickey and Minnie are arguably more notable in the couple's history, these sketches depict the first adventure that was created of them as a couple, which I feel like itself is a very important milestone. Also, if you have plain anxiety from all the recent news, do not watch that cartoon short film.
Definitely. Well, I love that pick and I love highlighting Plain Crazy. I feel like we don't talk about that short enough.
Mickey's a little mean in it.
Yeah.
He's a little aggressive. He had a lot of energy early on, but he grew up a bit, or at least the characters that Mickey Mouse would portray on screen would definitely mellow out a bit and become a little bit more tender and a little bit more everyman. But yeah, Plain Crazy, he's he's not quite the Mickey that you might associate with, so many decades now of representation on screen or in the parks. So, fair warning: if you watch Plane Crazy, you're not going to expect what Mickey does next.
Yeah, it took a while to hone in that character, character development. It's nice to see that arc where he started and that lovable character that he is today, and all of the films that he's casted in as the lovable mouse. So now for my final honorable mention, I'm going with the 48-star American flag on display behind our Red Cross ambulance in our first gallery. This flag was gifted to Walt by Harriet Alice Howell, volunteer canteen worker for the Red Cross, who worked with him during his time there. The flag flew over their Red Cross camp and was later sent as a birthday gift to Walt. Walt's daughters, Diane and Sharon, ensured this prized flag was draped over their upstairs railing of the entrance hall of their walking way home on his birthday each year. So this flag really is a sweet representation of the love Walt's daughters had for their father.
Absolutely. And to kind of bring it all back to, Walt's love for his daughters and the love that they had in their own lives. This museum began as a love letter from a daughter to her father. So, fittingly, my last honorable mention is Diane and Sharon's wedding photos. I've shared this before, but these photos are one of my favorite things to show when I'm giving someone a tour of the galleries. Comparing the photos of Walt walking in with Diane on her wedding day and being about her height with her in heels, and then the staged photo with Walt somehow now at eye level with Ron, who is much taller, really offers a humanizing look at the man behind the brand. And it also shows why we're such a unique experience as the Walt Disney Family Museum. Nowhere else can you see not just the career highlights, but the birth to passing family aspects of one of the most well-known figures of the 20th century. So I think that was a good one to wrap up on.
Yeah, wow. That was such a fun clash, Chris. Those were great picks this time around. I'm really looking forward to seeing who will take the win this time. It really is anyone's game. So good luck.
To you as well. Make your voice heard on your favorite objects featured here today, and visit our Instagram stories today, February 28th, to cast your vote, or you can email us your vote at podcast@wdfmuseum.org. And don't forget those wedding hashtags.
Well, thanks for tuning in to WDFM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on all social channels at WDF Museum for all the latest updates.
Wear your heart on your sleeve and keep moving forward.
Bye.
Bye.